Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on citrus. We will get started in just a moment. Before we start, I just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight a really cool resource that we have at many of our library branches that all gardeners should know about, and that is our seed libraries. So what that is simply a collection of various types of seeds that you can come look through and take home whatever you'd like, and you can start your own plants at home. And some of these locations also accept donations. So if you have a surplus of your own seeds, you're welcome to bring those in and donate. So as you can see here, we have these seed libraries at over half of our branches. So hopefully you can stop by and check one out. And now we will move on to learning all about citrus. So I'll pass it over to the coordinator for tonight, Whitney. Take it away.
Thank you, Serenity. And Robyn, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. Welcome to tonight's program on growing citrus. My name is Whitney Kirkendall, and I'm a UC Master Gardener volunteer and tonight's moderator. This program is co-sponsored by the Contra Costa County Libraries and the University of California Master Gardeners. All participants will be muted and video turned off for this presentation. Please use the Q&A icon toward the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, not the chat box. This session will be recorded for educational and promotional use by the University of California. The recorded presentation will be available on YouTube shortly after tonight's event. Closed captioning is available tonight and when accessing the recording on YouTube. A handout will also be made available. We will have 2 question and answer sessions, one in the middle of the presentation to answer questions on material covered at the beginning of our talk, and a second longer Q&A session at the end. We have a group of expert UC Master Gardener volunteers answering questions as well. Thank you, Greg Letts and Stephanie Hargrave, for assisting us tonight. I would like to request that you hold your questions initially, as the information may be covered during the presentation. If your question was not addressed, please type it into the Q&A. Next slide, please. Our mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscaping practices to the residents of Contra Costa County. And that is you. Next slide, please. Tonight, our speaker is Robyn Barker. Robyn became a volunteer with the UC Master Gardening Program of Contra Costa County in 2017 and has since logged almost 1,900 hours in a variety of activities, including the help desk, plant sales, volunteer support, new volunteer training, growing gardeners, and speakers bureau. She recently completed 2 years on the executive leadership team for the program, helping to develop its strategic vision and mentoring project leaders. She loves growing citrus and looks forward to sharing her experiences with you. Now I'll turn over the talk to Robyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney, for your kind introduction. And welcome to my presentation on growing citrus. In this presentation, we're going to begin by talking about what is citrus. Then we'll talk about some good advice on selecting a citrus plant, planting that citrus plant, and then taking care of it. And then finally, what to do when problems arise. At first, I'd like to learn a little bit of information about you. And so, thank you, Whitney, for putting up our little poll here. And I'm going to be asking about how many citrus plants you have. And it's okay. You can just be interested in the subject.
And we'll just give it another minute here so everybody can respond. All right. And here are the results.
Wow, I am so glad to see how many people have experience in growing citrus. And so I'm hoping that the information, oops, I dropped my mouse, will be interesting to you. Okay. If you've attended one of our talks recently, this slide will be familiar to you. Hang on. When we give our talks, we frequently start with it because the concepts that it describes underline everything that we talk about, including growing citrus, which I'm going to be talking about tonight. These 4 foundations of success underline what we call good cultural care. The first one is soil. Soil is the basis for a healthy garden. It is home to an entire system of living things: fungi, bacteria, earthworms, and the plant roots of the plant that you are planting. You want to keep it healthy. The second foundation is water. Consistent moisture in the soil is key. We all know that too much or too little water can be dangerous for plants. And citrus in particular, their roots are very sensitive to the moisture in the soil. Number 3 is aeration. Many people underappreciate the importance of the air in our soil. And yet, without the pore spaces in the soil, which allow the plant roots to obtain oxygen and the living things that live in the soil to breathe, our plants will not thrive. So we want to take care of those pore spaces. Number 4 is the sun. Last but not least, energy from the sun is the driver for plant growth. But just as for water, too much or too little sunshine can create problems. In the larger context, soil and air temperatures, which are also determined by sunlight, are critical for plant health. Citrus trees are subtropical. They're originally from Asia. What does subtropical mean? Well, typically citrus plants grow in a wide band of land above and below the equator. Contra Costa County is actually outside of that band and north of any commercial citrus growing areas in California. We can grow citrus here because of our warm offshore ocean currents and in the temperate temperatures that we have here in Contra Costa County. Citrus trees are evergreen, unlike deciduous trees whose leaves last only for a year. Actually, citrus trees' leaves only last for a year or two, but they don't drop off all at once or in the winter. They instead store food for the plant during its dormancy period. They may, however, drop off at a higher rate during blooming, which perhaps helps with the pollinators finding the flowers. Another vital part of citrus is their roots. Citrus roots are important or distinctive. They are all important, but they're distinctive or unique because they remain close to the surface and may extend quite a distance from the trunk, as much as 2 times the width of the canopy. In citrus in pots, of course, the roots are going to be contained, and that's going to keep the plant smaller. In any event, roots are acutely sensitive to moisture levels. Citrus flowers are perfect. Yes, I know all flowers are wonderful, but this isn't what I'm talking about. Citrus flowers are perfect in that they have both male and female parts. So most citrus are self-pollinating. Pollinators like butterflies, bees, and birds help, but aren't necessary. And you mostly don't need to have more than one variety or more than one of any variety of tree in your yard. We frequently plant citrus trees for their fruit, which we eat, but we typically don't plant the seeds. To guarantee that the variety of the tree is what we want, we plant juvenile trees instead. If you select varieties that ripen at different times, you can be harvesting fruit almost year-round. The most important factor that determines when fruits ripen and are ready for harvest is total heat. To get sweet fruit with low acidity, your trees need heat in the summer to develop sugar and low winter temperatures to drop acid levels. Interestingly, orange and lemons have similar acid levels. The difference in sweetness is a result of the sugars that are developed in the fruit. Very sweet fruit within any particular variety typically comes from areas with warmer weather. Varieties will have different heat requirements and cold tolerances. In any event, ripening periods will vary from year to year depending on the weather. Not all citrus comes in the Trix varieties of lemon yellow and orange. These plants are also part of the citrus family. Up in the upper right-hand corner, we have a kumquat that looks kind of like an elongated orange, but it's actually quite a bit smaller, just a little bit bigger than a grape. Over on the left-hand side is the bumpy fruit from the Thai lime tree. This fruit actually doesn't taste very good. We usually grow the tree in order to harvest the leaves to put in our Thai dishes. At the bottom right-hand corner is the Buddha hand, and you can see with its finger-like projections that there isn't much room there for pulp, and so we really don't grow the Buddha hand tree in order to eat the fruit. We do it because we find it very ornamental. When given protection during very cold winters, Meyer lemon is the most dependable citrus for thriving in Contra Costa County. Thought to be a cross between a lemon and a mandarin orange or tangerine, it's actually classified as a mandarin. Its fruit is a rich orange yellow with thinner skin and less acidic pulp and juice than lemons commonly found in produce markets. Meyer lemon fruit may have seeds or may not have seeds, and the plant may have thorns or may not have thorns. But regardless, all of these variations are typical of the only variety available, the improved Meyer lemon. Always buy your citrus tree from local reputable nurseries or other plant purveyors. And buy a younger tree. Younger trees that have not begun to bear usually transplant with more success and are less expensive than larger trees. When you're looking for a tree, choose a healthy looking plant that has foliage with a strong green uniform color, no blemishes or nicks on the bark, and fairly symmetrical branching and no obvious pet damage. Turn that plant over on its side and look underneath the pot. Plants that have roots protruding from the container have been in the container too long, and those should not be purchased. Roots that are visible should be pliable and an intense orange color. Like many commercially grown fruit trees, citrus trees are frequently what we call scions grafted onto what we call rootstock. A scion is a shoot or a twig that is cut from the previous year's growth from a tree of the desired variety. Usually consists of 2 to 4 buds from which leaves and blossoms will grow. It is grafted onto rootstock. The rootstock is going to provide qualities that will benefit the variety that you want to grow. It may enhance its disease tolerance, make it more hardy to cold, or be adapted to the type of soil that is common in the area where the grower wants to sell the trees. To a certain degree, it is going to impact the size. A tree that's labeled dwarf refers to a property of the rootstock that will influence the size of the mature tree, but it's not a set size standard. It just means that that tree is more likely to be smaller than a similar tree of the same variety. Now, rootstock can be grown as citrus trees themselves. They will produce fruit, but the fruit is typically bitter, very pithy, and full of seeds. It's desirable for growers because they want to grow more rootstock, but it isn't tasty, so it isn't something that's desirable to home growers. Watch out for the location of the graft union. Make sure that it is located far enough above the soil to prevent root disease problems. And watch out for any branches that are growing from below the bud union. And you can see that on this picture on the right. You can see that there is a branch that's growing below the graft union. It will frequently have leaves that look different, and it may be very vigorous. You want to cut that off if you see that and if it grows again, because it may sap the energy from your plant. Citrus trees at nurseries will typically have a tag with information about the plant. Look for information about the recommended climate zone or hardiness zone, because citrus varieties have different heat preferences and cold tolerances, and it's important to find a tree that is going to thrive in the preferred location where you want to plant it. The tag may refer to a sunset climate zone or a USDA hardiness zone. A sunset climate zone is a fairly broad designation. You can find out what the sunset climate zone is, or where you want to plant your tree, by looking online at the Sunset website or going to the library and looking at a sunset gardening book. Now, hardiness zones are based on the average minimum winter temperature located in particular locations, and the temperatures are set in 10-degree increments. These are published by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You can find maps of them online where you can locate your property, or you can input your zip code to find out what zone you're in. Other sources of information can also help you make a decision on what type of citrus is going to grow well in your location. You can ask questions of the nurseryman at the nursery that you're visiting, or else you can walk around your neighborhood and look and see what types of citrus trees are your neighbors growing, because they're likely to have a very similar climate profile where your property is located. And they can also give you some advice on how well their citrus is doing. Notice here before I leave this slide that the USDA hardiness zone 9 is shown on this slide. Generally, a good time of the year to plant citrus is in the spring after the danger of frost has passed, right about now. Trees planted in the spring will have more time to grow and will withstand the cold weather of their first winter better than trees planted later in the year. But summertime weather conditions in your location are important too. If you live in an inland area where the weather is particularly hot in the summer, you'll need to balance the risk or the resilience against freezing with resilience against heat. Trees that don't have an established root structure may have a hard time keeping their leaves and branches hydrated in the heat. So if you live in an area that has very hot weather, fall may be a better time for planting. Fall is also okay if your region is frost-free. And you will find that the nurseries in this area and other plant purveyors will typically have a good inventory of citrus plants either in the fall or in the spring. You want to find a place in your garden or on your patio or deck that gets at least 6 hours of sunlight and is protected from strong winds. Avoid areas that can trap cold air, such as a fence or a wall at the base of a slope. South and west facing areas of your home will typically be the warmest with the most consistent sun. These areas may also retain heat overnight, which can protect your tree on a very cold, freezing night. But note that trees in very warm areas of your property, especially those in containers, will be more vulnerable to drying out or to sunburn. The choice of whether to grow your citrus tree in the ground or in a container will depend, of course, about whether you have an appropriate location on your property. Citrus trees can do well in containers, so you have the option to grow citrus even if you don't have a good place to plant it in the ground. But first, let's talk about planting citrus in the ground. What's a good space for citrus in the ground? We've already talked about making sure that you have an area with at least 6 hours of sunlight and one that is not located in a cold air trap. We've also talked about citrus's wide spreading shallow roots. You will need to allow enough space for your tree to grow to its mature size, usually about 6 to 8 feet from buildings, driveways, and walkways. Avoid planting citrus trees also near plants with aggressive root systems that will compete with that tree for water and other nutrients. Citrus trees prefer well-drained loam or sandy loam soils, but with proper irrigation, they can be grown in clayey soils. If your soil is clayey, you should perform a drainage test before you plant it. Dig a hole at least 1 foot deep and fill it with water. Wait for the water to drain out of the hole and fill it up with water again. And then give it a good 12 hours or overnight and see if the water has drained out of it after that time period. If water remains in the hole, then the drainage is unlikely to be suitable for a citrus tree. You'll need to plant your tree above the soil. You can plant it in a raised bed or on a gently sloping mound of soil. Despite the picture, planting a citrus tree in a lawn is not recommended. Lawn watering, except in sandy soil, is too frequent and too shallow for a citrus tree and may increase the risk of root rot. However, if lawn is the only space available, remove the turf in a 3 to 5 foot circle surrounding the tree to remove competition from turf roots for water and nutrients. Removing the turf also eliminates the risk that you're going to accidentally damage your trunk with a lawnmower or weed whacker. The tree's canopy will eventually shade out the turf in any event. Dig a hole much wider than the ball of the tree. In general, the hole should be about as deep as the root ball and about twice its diameter. Adjust the depth of the hole so that the upper surface of the root ball is about 1 inch above the surrounding ground when the tree is lowered into the hole. You want to plant the tree proud so that the root ball is sticking up out of the ground a bit. Fill the area surrounding the ball to the top, but leave the upper surface of the original root ball exposed. After you finish, you can spread mulch under the tree and over the root ball in order to keep it cool and to keep it hydrated. But don't spread soil over the top. Don't amend the soil. Use the soil you removed when you dug the hole. If you put in a different soil, you may discourage the roots from extending into the surrounding soil. You want to water your tree immediately after planting and keep the root ball moist until the roots grow out into the surrounding soil. You may also want to water a little bit around the perimeter too, so that you encourage the roots to get into the surrounding soil. The surface roots concentrated on the outside of the root ball will die if they dry out. Remove the stakes supporting the tree so that the trunk and root growth will be encouraged or stimulated by the air that's passing through the branches to grow and support the tree. If you're concerned about high winds and stability in your area, you can tether the tree to 2 stakes, put about 8 inches to either side, perpendicular to the prevailing wind. Make sure your tethers are loose and padded so that they don't damage the bark, and be prepared to remove them as the tree grows. Tethers that are too tight and left on too long can choke your poor tree. Any 16 to 24 inch sized pot is a good choice to transplant your citrus tree. You can choose terracotta, plastic, stone, ceramic, wine barrel, or even a stock tank. It should be large enough to accommodate a few inches of root growth around the original root ball. Be conscious, though, of the interplay of the sunlight in your location and the pot material. If your preferred location gets a lot of afternoon sun, be careful about using a dark-colored ceramic pot or a metal pot. The sun can heat up the pot and the soil within and potentially bake the roots. Terracotta is very porous, so you'll have to keep an eye on moisture levels. The real risk, though, is drainage. Make sure the pot you select is going to drain well. Add holes if there aren't enough. The roots don't like to stay wet, and too much moisture can kill the tree. Note that these are not soil per se. They're mostly a mixture of forest products. Some potting mixes do contain minerals, which is a good choice. But don't use soil from your garden. It's too heavy. You want to select a commercially available citrus potting mix. You want a potting mix that will allow for adequate drainage and promote healthy root growth. You can use an all-purpose potting soil mix, but you want to make sure that it's lightweight and drains well. If it contains a large proportion of dense absorbent material, mix in some perlite, fine bark, or cocoa fibers. Cactus and succulent potting mix is also a good choice, although check to see if the brand that you've acquired contains a lot of sand. If so, you want to add some lighter materials. You can add some mesh across the bottom of the pot to stop the soil from draining out, but do not add pebbles or gravel to the bottom of the pot. These can actually interfere with good drainage. To get your plant out of the pot, hold the trunk at the base and gently pull it out. Now don't lift it up directly. Put your plant over to the side and ease it out. If needs be, you can gently slice the pot on one side to loosen it. The trick is to disturb the root ball as little as possible. You also may want to wait, like you can see on this picture in the left, and do the measuring where you're going to place your pot and how much soil you're going to use while the plant is still in the pot. And that way it will protect the root ball and it'll make it less of a mess. So you're going to want to place your tree in the center of your new container and check the soil level. You'll want to add soil to the bottom of the container so that the root ball will sit where its top is about 2 inches below the rim of the pot. So you can see this on the picture on the right. Note where the grafting union is. It should be well above the soil line. You want to add soil to the perimeter until it's about 1 inch below the top of the root ball. Remove the stake. Trees need to sway freely in the wind in order to be stimulated to grow strong trunks and roots. If you're going to add an irrigation line, remember you're going to be irrigating the soil, not the plant. So make sure that your water line is well away from the trunk. And this applies also to planting your citrus tree in the ground. With your irrigation line in the ground, you're going to, over time, be expanding the circle of watering as the roots extend into the surrounding soil. You're going to water your new tree after planting and then check it the next day and add any soil if it is settled and any new soil is needed. You may also want to add some mulch to the top of your root ball to keep it cool and prevent it from drying out too quickly. There's no need to add any fertilizer at this point. Typically, the growers have added, or the nursery will have added enough fertilizer for the tree, and you can wait until the following year. Potted trees require repotting every 2 to 3 years, or when the roots begin growing out of the drainage holes. The best time to repot your tree is in spring before heavy growth, so it has time to establish in the new container. Select a container one size larger than your current one. For example, you will upgrade from a 5-gallon to a 7-gallon or a 7-gallon to a 15-gallon. Fill your new pot 1/4 full with a potting soil similar to the type used in the old container. Water this soil until it's evenly moist and the excess just begins to drain from the bottom. The process is similar to the first time you planted your plant, except that this time you're going to want to examine the roots carefully. If any are completely encircling the root ball, slice through them with a clean, sharp knife. Otherwise, they may constrict the root ball as they grow and cause the tree to die, and remove any dead root material. The sun's heat can damage the bark of a young tree as it is not yet shaded by foliage. It can burn and kill the bark, as you can see it did on this tree on the left. The white is the exposed trunk. To protect trees from sunburn, you want to paint the trunk with whitewash or a white flat, not enamel, interior, not exterior. That is a white flat interior latex paint that you mix with an equal amount of water. I'm going to pause here for a moment or two between selecting and planting citrus and care, maintenance, and pests to take a drink of water and see if Whitney has any questions that I can answer.
We do have a couple of questions, Robyn. The first one is with regards to a citrus tree that is blooming but not fruiting when it's in full sun. And I think you've touched on this a little bit indirectly. Could you talk a little bit about what might be causing that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? It's blooming, but it isn't fruiting.
They're flowers, but there's no fruit developing on the tree. What could be some of the things that might cause that?
And it is in full sun, so it's not lacking for sun.
Exactly.
Because frequently that's one of the problems, that the tree isn't stimulated to produce fruit. It may be, well, it's not going to be an issue with the pollination because they're self-pollinating. It may be a question of the watering and their other cultural care, that it is produced. One of the things that does happen is that it may end up dropping more of its fruit if it is not happy with it may be in an area where there's strong wind. It may be competing with other plants. It's hard to say.
Sounds like a good question for our help desk to get a bit more detail
Yes,
about.
it certainly does, because that's a quandary.
Thank you. Okay, and a second question is with regards to grafting of different varieties of citrus onto one tree. So sort of a fruit salad tree. Could you graft mandarin, oranges, or that type of a thing onto a lemon tree?
I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be possible, because it's almost like a rootstock. And that it should be something that can be done. But you have to be very careful about where you are obtaining your the grafts that you're using, because you have to make sure. That's one of the problems that we're having, and we're going to talk a little bit about later about Wang Long Big and the citrus psyllid. And one of the risks there are using grafts that may be bringing disease to your tree. So you need to be very careful about where you're locating, where the source is for your grafts.
Great, thank you. And just a quick reminder for everybody to please type your questions into the Q&A box and not the chat box. We may not see it if it's in the chat box. So thank you very much. And Robyn, whenever you're ready.
I forgot to get a drink of water. So. There are many options for watering citrus, but remember, you want to water the soil, not the plant. And remember that the roots spread in a wide circle, possibly twice the distance of the canopy. And that whatever watering solution you have, you need to take into consideration the change of the roots as the tree grows. Now here you can see in this picture many good choices. So there's a soaker hose, there's some drip emitters. although the single emitter is probably better for a container and it's not really recommended for one in the ground. Something more with an inline emitter that will be able to be spread over and water a larger area of the soil around the root zone is a better choice. But you can also use a watering can or hose. The main thing to remember is to water deeply and less frequently, and to check to see if your citrus tree actually does need water. Even if the surface of your citrus surface of the soil of your citrus underneath your citrus is dry, the soil underneath the surface under the roots may still be saturated. So you want to check the soil moisture not at the surface, but 6 inches to 12 inches below the surface to determine if it's time to water. The best option for checking your soil moisture is with your hands. Use a trowel or probe to dig a small hole. If the soil is dry and friable down there, it's time to water. If the soil clumps in your hands, it's wet and it's time to wait. You can do this also with a soil moisture meter, which are easy to find online or at your local nursery. I use mine frequently, but I'm careful to make sure that that soil moisture meter is well calibrated. What does that mean? I make sure by inserting it into wet soil and making sure that it's registering that it's wet, and into dry soil and make sure that it's registering that it's dry, because if it's no use if it's not working properly. Young trees in the ground are usually watered every 5 to 10 days. For a more mature tree, it's going to be about 7 to 10 days in summer, in June through September. But you want to pay attention to the weather in case adjustments are needed. If it's particularly hot or particularly windy, there may be different moisture requirements from your tree. You never want to let the root system completely dry out. For a potted citrus, watering deeply once a week is usually adequate, but again, you want to check it a couple of times a week just to make sure. A wilted tree that doesn't perk up after watering may indicate that it has soggy roots and has suffered from excessive watering. Keep an eye on the leaves too. Yellow cup leaves may also indicate that there's been too much water. Overwatering is a common mistake with many potted plants, and it simply washes out the nutrients from the root zone. And when you do water, avoid consistently watering on the trunk. Citrus trees support growing and fruiting year-round, so they are heavy feeders relative to other trees. Citrus trees planted in the ground require regular fertilization with nitrogen. Typically, most other nutrients are available in sufficient amounts in the clay loam soil that is typical in central Contra Costa County, or in Contra Costa County. If your soil is sandy, you live closer to the delta, or your citrus tree is in a pot, you may need to add other micronutrients. They can be applied effectively via one of the many available foliar sprays or drenches. Foliar means leaves, so a foliar spray is applied by spraying it on the leaves. Some sprays may affect the appearance of fruit, and so then it may be a better choice to use a drench applied to the root zone. Nitrogen should be applied in 3 equal applications. The first is applied in late January or February, just prior to bloom. Trees frequently are going to look pale at the end of winter because during their dormancy period, the tree does not bring in nitrogen from the roots to the leaves. The second application then can be applied in March or April to support fruit set, and a third in May or June to support fruit development. Avoid late season fertilization as it may affect fruit quality, delay fruit coloring, or make the rind rough. The flush of young leaves stimulated by fertilization can also make the plant more vulnerable to freeze damage. Now, dwarf trees and citrus trees in containers with restricted root space are going to require less fertilizer. Remember, you can use a chemical or organic fertilizer. Either will provide the necessary nutrients. An organic fertilizer, though, is slower to release its nutrients and is more readily absorbed into the soil with less potential for overrun or pollution. Follow the directions on the back of the packaging. Never use more than suggested. Be careful because excess nitrogen can leach from the soil and get into our streams and creeks. Apply over the entire root area and work lightly into the soil. Avoid getting too close to the trunk, and then water well after applying in order to avoid the fertilizer burning the roots. During the first 3 to 4 years after planting a citrus tree, fruit production is light. These are known as the non-bearing years. It's kind of the citrus tree's adolescence. You want your fruit tree to use its energy not getting a good education, but creating a good set of roots and a strong trunk and branch network that's going to support lots of fruit in the future. Once your tree starts bearing, it will follow a seasonal cycle that begins in the spring with the enlargement of flower buds that produce the current season's crop. In California, citrus trees, especially Meyer lemons, may have several growth flushes in spring, summer, and fall. Each growth flush can produce flowers and set fruit, but in most varieties, the spring flush is the most productive. You don't need to thin the fruit yourself. The fruit tree will pretty much take care of that itself. After the petals fall from the citrus bloom, you will see clusters of fruit like is shown on the picture on the left. Many of these, it's not going to produce a bunch of fruit like a bananas. Instead, most of these pea-sized fruit is going to drop about 1 month later. And this is what the trees do. Further on, though, if you have larger golf ball-sized fruit, they may drop if conditions exist that limit growth, such as excess heat. That may be that tree that was in the sun. It's perhaps a little bit too hot for that tree. A lack of soil moisture or adverse weather. I mean, too hot in that it may be making it too dry. I can only speculate. The fruit is typically not ready to harvest quite a long time after bloom, about 8 to 16 months. You can leave mature fruit on the trees, but the top quality is typically not going to improve over time. How do you know if your citrus fruit is ready to harvest? If it's reached its perfection of deliciousness? Pick it and see what it tastes like. Pruning is not required to keep citrus productive. You want to prune to shape your tree, though. Remove twiggy growth, dead wood, or weak branches, and any crossing, broken, or branches that are shaded in the interior of your tree. Sometimes very vigorous branches will shoot up straight to the sky that will give the tree a wild appearance. These may be water sprouts, and water sprouts aren't a good thing because they typically don't produce much fruit. So you would want to cut them off where they are coming from the branch. Be sure also to watch out for and prune off any suckers that arise below the graft or bud union from the rootstock. Citrus can be grown, as you can see on the left, as a sheared hedge or informal espalier. If you do prune, try to prune just prior to bloom or just after fruit set so that the tree can properly adjust its fruit load before the fruit drop. The best time of year to prune is late spring or summer. Avoid late season pruning because that, like fertilization, can stimulate excessive tender growth that is likely to be injured by any frost. Citrus trees vary in the amount of cold they can tolerate. Most will need protection if temperatures fall below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. A quick and short-lived plunge in temperatures is not as damaging as a prolonged exposure to cold. If you hear that a cold front is coming, get ready. First thing you can do is moisten the garden soil. If your soil has good drainage, you can even run a sprinkler system slowly or furrow irrigate through the night. The water gives off heat, and damp soil retains heat better than dry soil, protecting the roots and warming the air underneath your tree. The second thing you can do is remove fruit. This will increase the resilience of your tree, and freezing will damage the fruit in any event. Number 3, you can put old-fashioned heat-producing holiday lights on your trees, or use an old-school 100-watt light bulb that's rated for outside use. So that's the reason for the photo of the Christmas tree. Next thing you can do is use frost-covered blankets draped over your trees and attached to the ground to trap daytime heat. You can also wrap the trunks and the branches with insulating materials such as palm fronds, corn stalks, cardboard, or fiberglass. During wet weather, or God forbid, snow, you can put an outer covering of plastic film over your insulating materials in order to keep them dry. The plastic film itself isn't enough to keep your tree protected. Once the danger of frost has passed, you'll want to take off any of this insulating material. Frost-damaged vegetation withers and turns a dark brown or black, as you can see from the picture in the lower right. You can also see some damage that has taken place on this citrus fruit. Leaves, green wood, and fruit are more sensitive than hardwood. If your tree does have frost damage, don't prune away the dead wood or cut down your tree right away, even if it looks really dead. Wait, let your tree recover. It may take quite a bit of time. You want to wait until around now, when the tree would normally start its growth increase. And then hold off on any heavy pruning of that tree for a year or two while it recovers. Different types of citrus are going to vary in their cold hardiness. The table on the slide shows a few varieties and their susceptibility. Those with an H are highly sensitive, while those with an L have a lower sensitivity. Those with an M are in the middle. So you can see mandarins and kumquats are the most cold hardy varieties of citrus tree. A Meyer lemon is a mandarin, so it makes sense it's going to be hardier than a traditional lemon. I have a mandarin, a lime, a Meyer lemon, and a Thai lime tree. We had a freeze a few winters ago. I covered my trees, but it wasn't enough for the Thai lime tree, which started the spring with almost no leaves. The others were spread in a pile of death at its base. I was horrified and ashamed at failing my poor tree. I am a master gardener after all. But the tree has actually come back very nicely, and within the first year after this disaster, had a full crown of leaves on all of its branches. It took a little bit longer for it to start fruiting again, but the fruit aren't the reason why I was growing it in any event. Compared to other fruit trees, grown in the home garden, citrus trees have relatively few pest and disease problems if they receive good cultural care. Citrus are susceptible to whiteflies, aphids, and scale. These insect pests generally damage leaves, and in the case of scale, the branches. A forceful spray of water will dislodge aphids and whiteflies. In the case of scale, you may need to remove any heavily infected branches. These pests may cause some damage, but are unlikely to kill the tree. All aphids, whiteflies, and scale have many natural predators, so it's best not to spray with insecticides, which will also kill the beneficial insects and may contribute to a heavy rebound once of the predator or rebound of the aphids, whiteflies, and scale once the beneficial insects have been killed. Note that numerous species of mites can occur on plants. Mites are very small, about 1/150th to 1/100th of an inch. Different mites generally affect different citrus. They may discolor fruit and cause deformed blossoms or foliage. Damage is usually most severe in hot, dusty conditions and on water-stressed plants. Mites have many predators or natural enemies that prevent them from becoming plant pests. To improve the effectiveness of this biological control, you want to control ants and also minimize dust. So one good thing to do, for example, is to periodically hose off any small trees if you're having problems with mites. You want to avoid the application of broad spectrum persistent insecticides and miticides, which will kill those natural enemies. The best prevention is good cultural care. Water your plants sufficiently to avoid drought stress, because that increases mites and mite damage. Citrus leaf miner was one of the first pests on my new citrus trees, which is not surprising because this pest likes tender, young, shiny leaves. The larvae, well, the adult insect lays eggs on the leaves, and the resulting larvae, once they hatch, mine inside the lower or upper surface of the leaves. They leave a whitish trail. The mining can cause the foliage to curl and look distorted. The larvae are actually inside the leaves, so cannot be brushed, washed, or washed off. Look out for this pest when your trees are producing new leaves. Citrus leaf miner can survive as a larvae only again in the tender young leaf flush. Older leaves that have hardened off are not susceptible unless extremely high populations are present. Mature trees, those are 4 years old or older, are not really affected by this pest. They have a dense canopy of older foliage, so some damage on new leaves is only, the new leaves are only a smaller proportion of its total leaves, so it's not really going to affect their growth or their fruit yield. Very young trees don't have such a high percentage of mature foliage, and they produce more flush year-round, so they may support a higher citrus leaf miner population. They may experience a reduction in growth. However, even young trees with heavy leaf miner populations are unlikely to die. What to do? Don't prune off leaves damaged by citrus leaf miner, no matter how horrible they look, because the undamaged areas of those leaves will continue to produce food for your tree. Check your cultural care. How's your watering and fertilizing? Avoid using insecticides because you want to encourage beneficial insects and natural predators. Ant control is helpful for managing insect pests. Ants farm aphids and scale. They feed on honeydew that these sap-sucking insects produce. And as an exchange, they protect the aphids and scale from their predators. Ants can be prevented from climbing up your citrus tree by applying a sticky barrier like Tanglefoot. Not endorsed, any brand of sticky insect repellent is great. Don't apply it directly on the bark because it can damage the bark. First, wrap a strip of heavy paper or other protective material around the trunk completely, establishing a complete circumference, and then apply Tanglefoot to the outside surface. I use reversed duct tape, putting the sticky side to the outside of the tree, or so that it's facing outwards, so that the adhesive is not attaching to the bark. And I layer it over a layer of cotton, which fills in gaps if the bark is rough, because the ants will try to find a way underneath my tape. And I want to prevent that happening. You want to periodically check your sticky barrier and make sure that it is complete and the ants aren't finding a way around it. And you'll need to refresh it periodically. In order for your barrier to be effective, though, you're going to be careful to look in other ways that the tree may be having contact with the outside environment. You want to make sure that any branches aren't touching the ground or fences or structures, and establishing another way for the ants to get to your tree. Ants are very canny. If there's a way, they've got the will, and you're going to have to do some pruning then, or otherwise get the branches away from the ground or the fences or the other structures. Snails and slugs create irregular holes with smooth edges on leaves and flowers by scraping with their rasp-like tongues. They feed on both foliage and fruit, and among fruit trees are particularly fond of citrus. Not sure if it's a snail or slug? Look for silvery mucus trails to confirm that it's a snail or slug that's causing your damage rather than another pest. A good snail and slug management program is going to rely on a combination of methods. I'm going to mention them, but not provide further explanation here. The UC Master Gardener program has a very good pest note on snails and slugs, and if you have a snail and slug problem, I suggest that you obtain this pest note. But the first thing you want to do is eliminate shelter. You want to eliminate dark, damp places that your snails and slugs can hide, like underneath your air conditioner compressor or underneath some bricks or some lawn furniture. And check those areas and remove the snails and slugs that are hiding there by hand picking. A good time to do this is later in the night or first thing in the morning. Wear some gloves, be prepared to pick them off and toss them into a bag and throw them into the garbage. You could set a trap for them. A good trap is the rind of a melon put with the fruit side to the ground near where your citrus tree is, and to entice any snails and slugs to come underneath there. In the morning, grab that melon, throw it in a bag, and toss it into the green bin. You can try using a barrier. Some barriers that people have used with success are copper flashing or a line of diacetomous earth. Bait is also, you can also think about using baits. Baits can be part of a management program. It is best to use them in conjunction with habitat modification, especially in gardens that contain plenty of shelter, food, or moisture. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here other than to recommend that you select bait that contains iron phosphate. Iron phosphate baits are available under many trade names, including Sluggo and Slug Magic. They will seemingly operate a little bit slower than other types of baits. You're not going to see a bunch of shells lying in a pile, because the snails, once they ingest the bait, they're going to go off someplace else to die. They aren't going to continue eating your plant. And best of all, this type of bait has the advantage of being safer for use around children, domestic animals, birds, fish, and other wildlife. Some formulations of iron phosphate baits are listed as acceptable for use in organic systems. What you want to do is avoid baits containing the active ingredient metaldehyde. Metaldehyde baits are particularly poisonous, and they're attractive to dogs and cats. You don't want to use them where they may be accessed by children and pets. And of course, you want to avoid using them around food crops. Ground squirrels, gophers, mice, and even rats enjoy citrus now and again. If you see extensive bite marks like you can see on this orange, your perpetrator may have 4 legs and sharp incisors. Strategies for vertebrates include fencing, trapping, and natural controls like owls, snakes, and cats. Mine is particularly effective. Note that gophers can be poisoned with bait put into their tunnel systems, but above ground poison bait is illegal and ineffective and may expose pets and non-target wildlife such as raptors and owls. This is a more serious problem than the other pests I've discussed. The Asian citrus psyllid is a tiny mottled brown insect about the size of an aphid with brownish mottled wings. You can see the adult form in the photo on the left, feeding with its head down and its tail, which is actually its wings, up in the air. The nymphs are shown in the middle photograph. They are tiny and yellowish, and they excrete white, waxy, curly tubules. They feed on young citrus tree leaves. They deform the leaves by twisting and curling them. The Asian citrus psyllid isn't a problem because of the damage it does to our citrus trees. Asian citrus psyllid is problematic because it spreads a disease called Huanglongbing or citrus greening. Huanglongbing can kill a citrus tree in as little as 5 years, and there is no known cure or remedy. All commonly grown citrus varieties are susceptible to the pathogen, including some plants like the curry plant that aren't even citrus at all. The citrus takes the bacteria into the psyllid takes the bacteria into its body when it feeds on an infected plant. And then when it flies to a healthy plant and feeds on that plant, it will inject the bacteria into the healthy plant as it feeds. Huanglongbing has decimated the commercial citrus industry in Florida. When you go to the grocery store and purchase orange juice, it no longer comes from Florida. It is likely that it no longer comes from Florida. In 2008, the Asian citrus psyllid was first detected in California. The psyllid spread throughout Southern California, particularly in urban and suburban environments like yours and my backyard, and also in commercial groves. The psyllid has since expanded its range to the Central Valley and the Central Coast and has been found as far north as the San Francisco Bay Area and sites near Sacramento. The only way to protect our trees and to protect citrus growing in our backyards is to prevent the spread of the Huanglongbing pathogen. And how do we do this? You want to purchase your trees, as I mentioned in the beginning, from local reputable nurseries and other plant purveyors to avoid bringing Asian citrus psyllid or Huanglongbing into your yard. Look for the quarantine tag. All of Contra Costa County is in zone 2. Do not take this tree out of the quarantine zone. Make sure that you know the source of any plant grafts. The first Huanglongbing infected tree in California is believed to have been the result of an illegal graft. Check your trees monthly for the citrus psyllid. Distorted leaves can result from many causes, including the citrus leaf miner. What you're looking for is the waxy tubules and tiny yellow nymphs. Now is a good time when you're starting to get the flush of leaves during the springtime. Now is a good time to check your trees. In order to find the waxy tubules and the tiny little nymphs, you're going to need to use a magnifying glass. If you think your tree has Huanglongbing, or if you find the Asian citrus psyllid, call the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Exotic Pest Hotline at the number that's listed on this slide. If you can't remember what that number is, or you just remember something about it, please call our help desk and they can assist you with that information. Thank you for listening to my talk about growing citrus. I do have a little favor to ask of you. I have a poll that I would like you to answer that will help me when I give this talk in the future to find out what part of the talk was the most useful.
All right, Robyn, we've got the poll going, and I'll give it just a minute here to give people some time to respond.
I'm so pleased to see proper cultural care doing very well. It's moving ahead, going past its past pest control. But people are also, interested about the citrus psyllid and Wan Long Bing. So I'm very pleased at these results. And it looks like we're going to have a very successful year for everybody's citrus.
All right, great. Thank you, Robyn. That was a great presentation and very educational on growing citrus. For more gardening information, please visit our Contra Costa County Master Gardener's website, which is filled with research-based information. Follow us on social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and a YouTube channel. If you live in Contra Costa County, you can email our UC Master Gardener Help Desk with your gardening questions. And if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Perfect. So this is our 2024 webinar lineup. Tonight and all prior programs are posted on our YouTube channel soon after the live program date. We hope that you join us for other webinar talks that we have scheduled in the coming months. The list of upcoming webinar programs can also be found on our website. Registration is typically posted the week prior to the event on our website, Facebook, and e-newsletter. Also, the library will send an email if you are on their mailing list. And yes, you can go ahead to the next slide, Robyn. Thank you.
Sorry, I was getting excited.
And help us serve you better. Our follow-up survey, which will show you a QR code for next, helps us get the information we need to improve the quality of our programming. And so if you could go on to the last slide there, Robyn. Now, Robyn has created a great handout with links to additional information regarding growing citrus. You can access the survey by using the QR code on this page, or use the link that Serenity will put in the chat box. And once you complete the survey, you will find a link to the handout on the thank you page. And with that, I think we can go ahead and Robyn, if you're ready, we can start answering some of these questions that we've gotten.
Okay.
Perfect. And feel free, if you would, to leave it on the QR code so people can get a chance to,
I'll go
scan
back.
that.
Okay. All right. Oh, let's see if I can figure. Oh, did I lose my screen? Let me get it back up again.
Okay, while you do that, I'll peruse through these questions here, and you can let me know when you're ready.
As it stopped playing, it's being very naughty. I'm having all kinds of technical problems today. Do we have it back?
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Great job. All right. So the first question is with regards to planting pollinator plants in the same pot as a citrus tree. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Is it competing with the citrus, or is it okay to leave them in there?
Well, it really depends how big your pot is, but generally, the citrus tree flowers are perfect. And so pollinators are normally not necessary. And the roots on the citrus tree tend to be shallow. So yes, you may have some competition going on there. So maybe that's not the best place for your pollinator plants.
Great, thank you. Okay, an additional question, and this with regards to some citrus being alternate bearing. In other words, bearing fruit one year and then maybe skipping a year or being a lot lighter in fruiting the next year. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I actually don't have much experience with my citrus trees are pretty consistent. My persimmon trees, that's a completely different story. But my citrus trees are not alternate bearing on the whole. It may be a function of the weather because how well your citrus trees may bear is going to be dependent on what the weather is in that particular year.
So it sounds like it might be a good idea to send some specific details with a question to the help desk on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That may be the best choice.
Great. Okay, and so one of our attendees has had a black coating of dust develop on the winter months on their citrus tree leaves, and they're curious if we can theorize on what that might be.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about immediately is that aphids and other pests that produce honeydew can frequently the honeydew can attract black mold, and that may cause the black dust that the gardener is experiencing. So watch out for any ants, and and watch out to see if you have any aphids or whitefly, and maybe blast them off with some water. And that's,
And
speaking of, or else, get the neighbors to stop the campfires. I don't know.
and in the case that it is the black sooty mold, the follow-up question was, is it still safe to potentially eat that fruit? What are the recommendations to be able to consume that, if any?
If it's black sooty mold, I would think that it would be fine. Just take the rind off the fruit and it should be fine inside. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but that seems to make the most sense to me.
Perfect. And just a general question, particularly for limes, but maybe in the case of any citrus, how can you tell when a lime is ripe on the tree? And this probably is dependent on the type of lime that you're growing.
It really does, because I know, like with my Meyer lemons, when they're first coming out, they're actually the tastiest once the fruit color has darkened and is more orange colored. Some fruit I know can go through being yellow and then I think limes also can be green and then become yellow. But I think the best time to figure out whether your tree, whether your fruit is ripe is to, start picking them and seeing whether they're tasty or not.
That's what I do, certainly. Okay, an additional question about water sprouts. Maybe you could provide a little information on what those are and how to identify them and what to do about them.
A water sprout is a sprout that usually grows kind of straight up into the sky. It can be very vigorous and very fast growing. And those water sprouts may sap the energy of your tree. They're also particularly not great at producing fruit. And you see water sprouts on all kinds of fruit trees. And typically when you see them, you don't want to cut them off halfway. You want to cut them off from the very beginning where they come in, because they're as long as there's any part of them there, they're continuing to, have sort of their negative influence. And it's kind of a question of judgment, figuring out whether it is a water sprout. If it's very fast growing, if it goes straight up to the sky, it's probably a water sprout.
And if I can throw in here, Robyn, they usually are kind of squarish, the shape of them. They're not a round stem. They're kind of a boxy shaped stem.
That's Greg, in case you were wondering what the disembodied voice was all about. And thank you, Greg. I really appreciate your help.
And Robyn, that looks like that is most of the questions for tonight. There are some detailed ones in there that I wanted to remind everybody to please go ahead and reach out to the help desk with the specific details of your situation. And they'll be able to provide you a little more detailed information than we can do given our time limits tonight. And so with that, I think we are out of time. I want to thank our presenter, Robyn Barker, and our amazing QA team, Greg and Stephanie, for working so diligently behind the scenes. Lori Palmquist for her technical support, and Serenity Dean and the Contra Costa County Library for co-sponsoring this event. Thank you all for attending. Please do complete that survey so you can access the handout. And again, thank you very much. Good night.
And thank you, Whitney.
A pleasure as always.
Good night.